You know, when we study history, it is so easy to get completely lost in those sweeping macro narratives. You know the ones? The massive wars, the huge political movements, the redrawing of giant borders. But in this explainer, we're going to try something a bit different. We are using the micro to macro technique. We're going to view the birth and the expansion of the American nation through a much more intimate lens. The first-hand, fireside tales of a 19th century settler. Today, we're diving into the life memoir of Daniel Spangler. He was a man whose 69 years on Earth literally bridged the gap between a scrappy, brand-new post-revolutionary America and a sprawling, rapidly expanding nation.
Okay, let's dive into this. To truly understand this history, I want you to mentally transport yourself just for a second to early 1851. Picture a rustic wooden porch. You can hear the rhythmic, heavy creaking of an old rocking chair. Daniel Spangler, who's really feeling the deep ache of his 69 years, has gathered his grandchildren around the fire. We're talking Anna Maria's little ones, Sarah Elizabeth's brood, and baby Helen. And he tells them that an old man has earned the right to tell a few stories before the years run out. By bringing us directly into his living room like this, Daniel sets this incredible emotional anchor for his legacy. He's making sure his family understands the long, hard road that brought them to where they are today.
And to understand that road, well, we have to look at exactly when and where Daniel's story actually starts. Daniel was born on October 9, 1781, in York, Pennsylvania. Now, let's put that into historical context for a moment. The Declaration of Independence? That was signed in 1776. That means Daniel was born a mere 5 years after American independence. The country was brand new, totally unsure of itself, and completely untested. He was born to his parents, Rudolph and Dorothea. And get this, he was the 8th of 11 children. I mean, imagine managing 11 kids in one house during the earliest, most uncertain days of the American experiment. That scrappiness, that's going to define his entire life.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most universal American experiences, assimilation. Actually, scratch that. When Daniel was baptized at the Trinity Reformed Church, his name was recorded the old German way, Spangler with an E, because that is how his parents pronounced it. But over time, the family adapted. They altered it to Spangler simply because it was easier for American tongues. As Daniel himself noted, pretty soon nobody even remembered they had spelled it any other way. It perfectly captures that broader immigrant experience, right? Bending and adapting to a new country without entirely losing the roots of what came before.
As Daniel grew up and eventually took over the family affairs after his father passed in 1811, he proved to be a guy who just didn't rush into things. Which brings us to this very specific number, 33. At the mature age of 33, which, by the way, was a time when a lot of men in that era had already been married for a solid decade, Daniel made what he proudly called his absolute finest decision. On March 12, 1815, right back at that same Trinity Reformed Church where he was baptized, he married Elizabeth Koenig, or King in English. He wasn't some young guy acting on impulse. He knew exactly what he wanted.
And that highly calculated decision led to our next number, 36. Daniel and Elizabeth enjoyed 36 years of marriage together. But what is absolutely crucial to take away from this is that in the early 19th century, a marriage of this length wasn't just some fairy tale romance. No, it was a literal survival partnership. When Daniel talks about Elizabeth, he speaks of a woman who kept the entire farm running. It was this relentless, non-stop cycle of cooking, preserving food for those brutal winters, sewing clothes, and raising children. Without her profound grit, the Spangler homestead simply wouldn't have existed. Period. But, as with life back then, that 36-year partnership was also marked by some pretty profound tragedies, which these family records make devastatingly clear. Together, they had 10 children. 8 of them grew strong, survived to adulthood, and went on to raise families of their own. But they also had to endure the harsh reality of 19th century grief, burying 2 babies. Little Anna Katrina in 1816 and Henry in 1820. Daniel doesn't sugarcoat this at all for his grandchildren. He just calls them hard years. It's a really stark reminder of the immense emotional resilience required just to build a family in early America.
And that resilience really fueled their physical journey, mapping perfectly alongside America's own westward expansion. Shortly after getting married in 1815, they literally packed up what little they owned and moved down to Winchester, Virginia, where good land was available. This is where a lot of their daughters were born. But Daniel always had his eye on this tract of land his father had purchased in Pennsylvania. They eventually moved there in 1829. And while they did chase a quick opportunity in Youngstown, Ohio around 1841, the deep pull of Pennsylvania eventually called them back home for good. They moved where opportunity called, exactly as the young nation was doing. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the incredible story behind how he secured that Pennsylvania land. $1 single. That's it. In 1828, Daniel's siblings, his father's other heirs, agreed to sell him a massive 200-acre tract of land for just $1, with the sole condition that he actually settle there within 2 years. In a time when land was a family's absolute most valuable asset, this wasn't just a basic transaction. It was an astonishing display of deep, familial trust. His siblings trusted Daniel to make something out of what their father had originally built.
And make something of it, he absolutely did, right here in Sandy Creek Township, Mercer County. This 200-acre tract became his life's work for over 2 decades. What really stands out in Daniel's memoir is his specific philosophy on how to build a homestead. He tells his grandchildren that a man builds something lasting by working good soil steadily, rather than chasing every new, fleeting scheme that comes along. That steady, generational mindset created a permanent base. In fact, it was so permanent that his children ended up marrying into neighboring families, intertwining the Spanglers deeply into the local fabric forever.
This whole lifetime of acquiring land, moving across states, and building a farm from the ground up eventually crystallized into one single core belief. Daniel knew his time was ending, and he wanted to make absolutely sure his descendants understood what truly carries value in this world. He told his grandchildren, quote, "A man's word and his good name are worth more than any amount of land or money."
So, the crucial point is how he distilled this wisdom into direct, highly actionable lessons for his family. First, work honestly and pay your debts. Second, treat your neighbors as family. He specifically calls out the Carringers next door, noting they've been as close as blood kin, really emphasizing that community is just as important as bloodlines. And finally, never forget where you came from. He urges them to always remember their hardworking German roots and the immense faith of ancestors who crossed an entire ocean with nothing but their 2 bare hands. Shortly after sharing these fireside tales, Daniel's long journey came to an end. He passed away on July 19, 1851 in Georgetown, Pennsylvania. He was laid to rest in Shickleyville Cemetery, right there in the township he had cultivated and called home for over 20 years. I mean, think about it. He lived through the War of 1812, he watched his family spread out across a growing country, and he saw America stretch its ambitions toward the far ocean. His single life perfectly mirrors the scrappy, steady, and sometimes heartbreaking rise of the nation itself.
Which leaves us with this final profound question, breaking right through the fourth wall of history. Daniel Spangler knew exactly what he wanted to leave behind. Not just 200 acres of soil, but a name completely synonymous with honesty, hard work, and deep community bonds. When we look at our own daily actions, our own partnerships, and the way we treat our neighbors, what legacy are you building for the generations to come? When the time comes for you to pull up a chair by the fire, what stories will you have earned the right to tell?